have this vivid memory from years ago that strangely you might just have your own personal version of. It was a family dinner, and I remember it mostly for what it became about for a moment. I'd reached one of those moments where the adults in the room needed to know that one of the young people sitting there had begun to develop a taste for things actually worth watching. I was invited by my dad to let the table know that I had just started watching a little show about 2 FBI agents. If you've had your own version of this, then you'll know that the resulting conversation tends to sharply transition from what you may have thought of something to what should be next on your viewing agenda. I don't blame them. It's hard not to join in when recognizable names are being thrown around. And I'm sure you can guess exactly what name eventually factored into the conversation. It was the first time I heard the name TwinPeaks. But the problem is though, I don't remember who mentioned it. It could have been my uncle, it could have been my grandmother, it could have been both of them, it could have been just her, but I don't know. And I hate that fact. The feelings are kind of hard to pin down. How exactly I feel about that is kind of hard to describe. Frustration, longing, regret. Call it just a crying shame that the beginnings of my relationship was something that defined part of how I look at art, part of how I look at the world, is something that I cannot totally recall. It's a name that I don't have yet. I can never just be totally alone in that feeling, in that memory, inaccessible and final. All that remains is just talking about TwinPeaks now. Something that I exercise no demons through, that I win no prize for trying. This is just a moment where I commit to a video, this desperate attempt at reminiscence, rather than just sit with the love that I have for something, rather than just simply be. Now is the time to say everything that I would love to go back and say to the people that they were then. To continue to recognize that there will always be something stuck in the background, that there will always be something just out there. Something that might just be called TwinPeaks. I guess that it's important for me to be clear that this isn't going to be some sort of an attempt to explain what TwinPeaks means. Regardless of how familiar you might be with this series, or if your understanding of it begins and ends with that one clip from The Simpsons, I maintain that there is still recognizable value in what you don't yet know about it. Any questions left on the table are precious. It would be a sickening proposition for me to try and condense something that's transcended being a vibe or a piece of fiction into these tangible little puzzle pieces that form an easy to understand and clear picture. It would just reduce it, and I'm really not in the business of putting hats on top of hats. This particular beast was hardwired to distance itself from objective statements. Its legacy genuinely forbids me from touching on something new. Put simply, I can start at the beginning, but I don't know where the music will be taking us. I'm not even sure I want to know what song is playing. But just to be clear, TwinPeaks is a small town just 5 miles south of the Canadian border, and it's a setting not unlike any other popular soap opera that you can think of, classic or modern. The difference though is that the big event murder that you typically save for a Christmas special or something is kind of just never really moved on from. The whodunit of the matter, that age-old enticing hook that creators DavidLynch and Mark Frost could have honestly run to the bank with, is only really sometimes of partial interest. Special Agent Dale Cooper is summoned to investigate the murder of local girl Laura Palmer, but it's a mystery that sometimes you have to remind yourself needs to be wrapped up. 2 seasons of truly chilling, and I'll even dare to use the word groundbreaking television, leaving us just to sit with a devastated community. A clue that can lead to a breakthrough in the case can matter, but it won't ever mean as much to TwinPeaks as someone screaming for what they've lost, or lingering in a moment where who they were just goes away for a little while. Lynch is where all of that starts. Don't get me wrong, Frost's voice is integral. TwinPeaks was not art devised with a singular vision, but it's still just the case that Lynch was the one who grasped the potential of this thing the hardest. Art really does owe a lot to the man in general, but television in its form we know it today just doesn't exist without what he did with TwinPeaks. Others played with this medium before him, and he by no means pioneered this small town, big secret setup. But he would be damned if television wasn't proven capable of leaving a new, valuable artistic mark of its own after he was done. Lynch challenged television creatives to simply try harder, to make the medium aware that it didn't just have to rely on himself or Twin Peaks to possess merit, or even draw in millions. What meant something to Lynch, what works in his head, was permitted to be standard place on the box thereafter. The vision didn't start and stop at the camera and the 5 to 6 setups that it was allowed to once work with. The story, the mood, it had to be encapsulated in everything just to show that it could. A motif, for example, could be all you needed to prove the room available for score alone to experiment in. Angelo Badalamenti's droning synths being ominous or damn near beautiful enough, no matter how many times it's being played, to just transport you to somewhere else. The imagery of Twin Peaks is iconic for a reason, but close your eyes when listening to David and Angelo collaborate, and you'll straight up still see without seeing. You'll understand that the presence of the show's trademark beautiful darkness, that tangible sense of Twin Peaks, feels even a fraction as powerful as it does because the narrative and music have never not been intertwined. I envy those today introduced to the madness through these tones, drawn in by the thing that made the rhythm, the mood, and even some performances endure as they have. The sonic in singular moments able to just swallow you whole. The highest praise that I think I can give to the soundtrack, or I guess the audio experience of Twin Peaks, whatever you want to call it, being that unlike a lot of TV since, it's really not far off from replicating the experience of a musical or an album even. You can get to that point where you'll stop even recognizing that you've been listening to different tracks. It's one continuous, haunting musical journey. I feel sort of blessed to have existed in the same era where Lynch himself is making art. There are so many recognizable creative traces in media today of what he's accomplished even outside of just Twin Peaks. Hell, the narrative and visual blueprints that he developed for making stories about small towns alone is really part of the reason that I became as initially enamored with stuff like Riverdale as I did. But I also get the privilege of recognizing those traces in places like television, because Lynch was unwilling to leave what he was working with as only what it had been previously known to be. He applied the necessary tools to translate the same feelings that you get from cinema, painting, or music, because why should television be limited? He found frustration in the medium to be sure, but I don't think he ever considered it lesser than what else could be paid attention to. The great gift of this important cultural touchstone being to spark a particular obsession, that nothing we work on can be considered anything less than sacred. When the will is invoked, creativity will breed creativity, and that matters. The camera in every episode is my favourite evidence of this. Reviewed against its contemporaries, Twin Peaks might seem lacking compared to what's being attempted with the camera today, but there's no other media that I would love to have witnessed released live, simply just to see the reaction to some of these shots when they broke the mold. An angle, the framing, the ordering of the shots, the lighting. It's as though Lynch marched onto set, stared at the camera and said, "This right here, they're never going to forget what we do with this." The goal was to achieve a feeling of travelling between dreams and reality, something that shooting on film helped build the atmosphere of. But you only got lost in it though when you realised we weren't moving. When after enough moments of just wrestling with the stillness, you're relishing in the reality that's being infringed upon. I understand the sort of tradition of keeping the camera a silent participant when you're working on those sitcoms or the soap operas of old. I was even once one of those don't let the craft distract from the story kind of people. But when you're being spoken to like this, you really do forget opinions like that exist. Honestly, because it's a challenge to see beyond solely the limited information that you're offered. You have to confidently let go of a dependence on what you immediately know something to mean, and embrace what being a co-author of potential meaning can do for you in the experience. I consumed those first 7 episodes of the second season with such a ferocity. The rot of the slog in the second season after Lynch had left became a real test of endurance. And it's all because I became obsessed with loading my brain with something that begged to creep into my thoughts in the dead of night. When I began to recognize the dread or the emptiness that you feel when you lack an invitation to sit with or leave some kind of mark of your own on what all this means to you. To see Twin Peaks attempted or crafted in any other way would be antithetical to the reason to have made it at all. Other than to spit out some explanation of what the experience is, to strip it of that vision would be the most foul way that you could taint Twin Peaks. An idea that those who Lynch and Frost convinced to come and work and innovate in the same space recognize the importance of. David Lynch didn't direct all of Twin Peaks because he didn't really have to. Just the example he was laying down was enough to bring about change. The filmmakers and collaborators brought to the table operating under the knowledge that whoever picked up that camera next didn't have to be David Lynch directing his masterpiece Twin Peaks. but that ultimately a lot was still riding on you. If the work was approached with the same philosophy, if you correctly maintained the vibe, a watershed moment for the industry might just be ushered in, rather than just leaving the world with an odd few hours of coffee and cigarettes. Getting that, understanding that assignment is, to me, possibly the key to successfully building on what Lynch started. In making this show in this way, Lynch had effectively walked into a bar, made a beeline for the jukebox, and picked the best song possible. Sabotage is playing, and everyone in that bar is having the best night because that's just who the man goddamn is. Too many others since, thinking that it must just be a good idea to regurgitate the easy bits, unaware that the audience now shrugs at what once left them spellbound. I'm not trying to attack anyone. Twin Peaks went for so long without a conclusive ending that picking up where the original left off was natural, the idea understandably appearing more enticing than it ever has original or smart. But it's always come across as a cynical move to me though. I really don't want to have to spell it out, but please don't ask me why I'm not in the mood for you to play Sabotage for the 6th time tonight. The ones to me who have managed to evoke that beautiful darkness, who make waves in auteur-driven television, rather than just rehash one auteur-driven television show, being the ones who, from the beginning or even on their second go around, just try not to kill the vibe. They understand that you never make something that's Lynch if you're not Lynch, so instead you just pick your own song. You stick on something like Loaded, and then just maybe, the crowd thinks, damn, maybe the night's not over after all. Something like that has got to be a pretty glorious moment. To put some art out into the world, to have got lost in your own dream, for others, or maybe even the man himself, to then tell you, no kid, you're in mine. To even momentarily sit in the canon or legacy of Twin Peaks, to bask in its shadow, what a sign that you're on the right path. I mean, after all, it's the kind of dream that we still need. There's enough fictional as well as real-world portraits of America that honestly would not make me ever want to go back. But the small stretch of the states that is this town is one hell of a view. One that we'd all find comfort eating, visiting, drinking, working, or resting in. Taking a sleepy little town and unleashing evil onto it is difficult territory to achieve something new with. When David Lynch and Stephen King each popularized the concept decades ago, they laid such an effective framework that to deviate from it is to do yourself a disservice creatively. It will just leave your world lacking. Before, during, and after the coming of disease, the unleashing of the beast, or the arrival of something as unknown as Bob, you are to feel what everyone in this town is collectively grappling with. There is a hierarchy between characters when the details of these texts are scrutinized, but it can never feel like that from scene to scene. The monster of the week stapled to the title may be what you came for, but it's time spent with this lived-in community that makes that fear somewhat immortal. After all, Bob burns so terrifyingly because it's the innocents that we've been smartly embroiled amongst who fear him the most. Lynch and King's portraits remain as real to us as they have because I can name the residents of this town, tell you their roles in the community, my favourite things about them, and ideas of what I think they might each want out of life. And that's because the show gave me time to discover these things. It's a police procedural that becomes a horror story, but so much of it is just the comings and goings of everyday ordinary folk. Unique glimpses of life that you're lucky to see even just once. It's what Major Briggs wants for his son, but that he can't quite say. Retching at the thought of not one, but multiple slimeball men. The humbling of Rosenfeld that stuns. What Nadine just throws at Big Ed. What Cole manages to find when he's with Shelley. It's looking at Bobby and Shelley, the perfect portraits of the human form that they both are, and remembering, oh holy fuck yeah, those two are actually real. The bumps in the relationship that they find, what they do in their own time, and the trivialities they hold precious. None of them eventually exiting the stage can mean anything if their lives are not first shown as intimately or boldly as the horrors done to them. Their presence and behaviour feels reminiscent of filmmakers like Sam Raimi or Steven Spielberg finding civilians where they shot and baking them into their pictures. Done simply because authenticity isn't something that money can really buy. A high school girl, a receptionist, a waitress, or a businesswoman, None of them are disposable when each of them might be remembered for that one unique thing each of them might individually say. Be that an intentional joke, a strange moment of oddity that you look at and feel confused afterwards, an admittance of something that's been longing to be said, or a particular knife in the heart. How they express how they feel about their circumstances and the people they're becoming is a beautiful, nostalgic, irreplaceable, and just real piece of lives touched by both the light and the dark. A true ode to happiness and suffering. A memento of those pieces of life that I think I'd want to protect for maybe just myself. Consistent, glaring evidence of the cost, should Special Agent Dale Cooper somehow fail. Now, not to be silly for a moment, but I would genuinely die for Cooper, people. I need not mention those glorious 1 minute and 29 seconds of his introduction, where he became nothing short of the standard by which I have measured all protagonists since. I don't need to mention that once you see Kyle MacLachlan in this role, you'll wonder why he hasn't had 10 times the career he honestly deserves. I mean, seriously, pop him in the next Rian Johnson joint. Don't think, just do it. I feel what I feel for the man though, because he's the type who dwells in that dangerous area of making me a better person by the end of my time with him. The thing about him not being the calm that he radiates, or the genuine friendship that his decency warrants, but that feeling of, oh crap, look how far I've run into the dark for this man. The parts of her life that Audrey begins to look at despite the warning signs. The new standards that the staff of the station feel compelled to meet, not out of some desire or inadequacy, but because they've met someone who, as an agent of the Bureau, or not, would do the same for them. Aid his fellow man, even if they were wrong to him, because some part of that special man would still just want the best for you. The infectious example of this hero becomes, after a time, a small part of how you choose to just be. And as far as famous lawmen go, he still, after all this time, manages to stand apart. Where so much of this genre since has been about following men who have let their lives become as painful and lonely as what they see in their work, Cooper has never let himself fall. A job like this makes a bleak personal philosophy a part of the package. Cooper possesses that. His work commands for him to have to handle each day the rawest end of this experience that we call life, but he's never let that isolate him. He acts with the same skill and conviction as his peers, but he possesses a faith that his contemporaries would be too jaded to believe can still exist. Not some sort of religious belief, but in heeding the importance of signs, knowing that when the universe chooses to play dice with our lives, some good might still come of it. We just have to be willing to look for them, to place a faith in people and show them that we believe in them, despite the darkness that we both know them to be capable of. TwinPeaks often showing the worst of what we can be. So much of this town is so certain that if Laura hadn't died, that if she hadn't washed up on the shore wrapped in plastic, then none of what's going wrong now would be happening. It just didn't have to happen like this. Things could never have been said or brushed under the carpet, but what's being exposed now was always brewing. People had to die. Evil had to leave a permanent mark on the town to show how quickly they could all be touched by it. And in doing so, Laura Palmer really becomes the look at what brutality does to a community. I myself have witnessed events where people have been smashed together in ways they might never have dreamed because right now there's nothing else to be done than just sit with the devastation that we've stumbled into. There's no looking past it. Laura works so well as a concept before she ever became a character because we're never allowed to forget the horror that she suffered. That in the background of any residual fun that we might be having, there's a void created by her absence. That in those horrible, quiet moments you remember will just never be filled without her. There are certain episodes of television that I think of as achievements. Certain episodes that you can view as perfect portraits of everything a show is at its core. A single stretch that sums up the intent of its creators. Think of Connor's Wedding from Succession, the Lance episode from Cucumber, or The Two Storms from Hill House. But TwinPeaks to me is a little bit different because it just doesn't have one of these. Lynch lets what he's most interested in come out of him in waves. TwinPeaks is just too richly built a tapestry to pinpoint where its examination of grief is its most hurtful. It is, when it wants to be, a quite horrible stretch of fiction that, as anyone who's experienced the process itself will surely know, can strip you down to your most vulnerable self as many times as it wants. He can drop that ace in the hole whenever the moment is just right. Lynch's signature utter knife in the heart being when he lets people just show that they know. That sense that's unshakable as soon as you feel it, that something terrible has happened. They can't fully work out what this presence is, or perhaps they're purposely trying not to. Some immediate, identifiable threat might be easier to contend with, instead of a sadness closing in that becomes inescapable. They erupt, they scream, they beg, they cry out. Because what else are you going to do when you know that someone you love is gone? I think it might be the key reason why the pilot became as much of a moment in time as it did. The scene specifically where Laura Palmer's classmates learn of her death carries just such an energy. An almost funny energy if you look at it from a certain angle, but the despair is what I can't help but focus on. Others would feel it more, and even these exact teens would come to know it again quite soon. But this offering of the feeling feels sort of disgusting today. You wish that Lynch didn't have to have predicted this, that this shouldn't be such an eerily prophetic vision of what's become tragically familiar circumstances. Any attempt at some sort of forced normalcy completely shattered when they all collectively realize what they will now have to carry on with forever. It's such a painful expression of emotion that, honestly, just like the best of Succession, leaves you feeling not really human when you come out of it. How can I even be capable of something like this? Whatever I felt in my own time feels more and more like nothing after watching these people. What's left is standard procedure for this kind of story. I receive an intimate understanding of this girl, this daughter, this friend that will only ever be secondhand. We sit through that time after the demise, where you see the people who loved her dread losing those remaining moments before total acceptance, where she's in the ground, and the only visitors to the Palmer house are the ones that death has made welcome. Cooper and Sheriff Truman respectfully aware that they initiate the transition, that when they visit Laura's home, they help remind those left that this is somewhere she will never live again. Just like that table that I may never eat around or speak at again. I wonder if doing something like this is wrong. Rather than contend with what I don't want to feel right now, I just bury my head in some twisted vision of what I want the past to give me. This most recent return to Twin Peaks for this video has been a wake-up call in ways that I maybe needed. This ghost that I'm just happening to call Twin Peaks will bring me no closer to the people that they were. No matter how hard I try to project my thoughts about a story onto them, I get no closer peek at what was by staring at the stories I'm trying to find them in. I'm really just left with Twin Peaks. 30 episodes of television that once you see, you feel compelled to hold close to you. A journey that reminds me not how to feel, but maybe just that I need to. Not proof, but something that does what it can to convince you that you still do have a soul.